Get this recording. What we're going to do today is that I'm going to review chapter 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, I believe, today and Thursday from your book on teaching students who are exceptional, diverse, and at risk in the general education classroom. They have some excellent intervention strategies that can be used in your final and then later on in your practice your future practice as a student, as a teacher, I mean. And so this will be what we do today. I'm thinking we'll probably be here for about an hour or so today, and then on Thursday. A couple of housekeeping rules, real quick. Um, Please fill out the course evaluation as soon as you can for this course. I know it's been a crazy semester, but we've tried to do as best as we can, and we've learned a lot. And I think that we'll make some changes as we go forward, with this particular course, to make it more accessible online and in this unique environment that we're in right now. And two, everything that you've not turned in yet that you're working on to get turned in needs to be turned in by this Friday or this Saturday. I'll give you till this Saturday at 11:59. If it's closed, if the particular assignment is closed, go ahead and just email that to me in an email, and that way I will make sure to get it appropriately graded and put in the right spot. So that's kind of the thing that the two housekeeping things we have going on today. So with any questions from anybody, I'm going to open the floor. You can unmute yourself and ask the question. So I'm going to give you a few minutes for that. So questions about the final, about coursework, anything that we have going right now. You can always enter a chat question and I'll answer that as soon as I can. So I'm going to share my screen, and then we're going to look at the chapter 12 of the textbook and kind of review that information. So let me share my screen and we'll start reviewing this information. All right, so chapter 12 is all about differentiating instruction and assessment for all learners. Now, we have gone through this particular information in the past, and specifically when we were looking at RTI processes. So some of this will be a little redundant for you, but that's okay. Let's walk through it and see what we have. And at any time, if you have any questions or comments, unmute yourself and ask a question. All right, here we go. So the first thing is that we need to understand that when we are doing instruction, we are doing it from a standards-based format. And what that means is that each state has developed its own um, academic standards. Texas, it's called the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. And so that's a really important thing to remember, is that we're looking at these are the standards that we are basing all of our instruction. It's also what students are going to be assessed on at the every spring. Is they're assessed over the standards, the TEKS. And this all started way back in 1983 with A Nation at Risk, and then later in 2000 with the No Child Left Behind Act, which is actually the Elementary Secondary Education Act, and it's now called the All Students Succeed Act, is what this one's called. At one point during the Obama administration, they were trying to come up with Common Core standards, and that really didn't do well. Each state has their own standards. They're aligned well with each other, but when we tried to do the Common Core, it all fell apart. Federal government just says you have to have an education. It's up to the states to determine what that is. And so this is a state issue and not a federal issue about what is to be instructed in the schools. So that's really important. However, what came out of that is the reading, science of reading came out of all that information. And so everyone everywhere is having to teach the science of reading. And it doesn't matter if you're in elementary school or secondary or in special ed, all of you are a reading teacher to some extent. So that's going to be very important that you make sure that you have the big five for reading included in your curriculum. So that's very important. Okay, so we're not going to look at the Common Core standards since they're not done anymore. Now, differentiating instruction is a very interesting thing. And remember, we aligned differentiating instruction with accommodation. They're actually the same thing. And I want you to remember that because you can differentiate with any student anywhere without having a written plan. You can do the exact same thing with students when you accommodate for them. So accommodation and differentiation is the exact same thing. And we differentiate by looking at the student's interests, things that interest them. I had a student one time where we developed the whole instructional strategies around arachnoids or spiders. And so he did all of his writing about spiders. He did all of his reading about spiders. He did math using spider manipulatives. That was his special interest. And because of that, he really engaged in the classroom much better and learned from focusing on his interests. Another thing that we need to look at is to make sure that we're looking at students' cultural backgrounds, because different cultures can affect the way a student learns. And so that's very important to know their cultural background and to integrate that as much as possible into the instruction of students. We need to also know, make sure that the students have the foundations of the reading, writing, and arithmetic. The next thing about pace of instruction, some kids are going to move at lightning pace, and some kids are going to be moving at a sloth's pace. So we need to know the pace of instruction, and we need to differentiate for that. Remember, processing time is a big deal. And so knowing a student processes something slowly, we need to reduce the pace of instruction to get them to engage better. The next item, level of conceptual complexity and density of content. Some kids, you're going to need to do a task analysis and use those discrete skills, teach those along the way, and be and follow those much more, they're needing to work much more on the prerequisite skill rather than the skill that's being taught at that time, so they can get that skill eventually. Textbooks are, you guys should know this, they're dull and tend to be very encyclopedic, inclusive of all the information. You need to make the information interesting. So textbooks are reference sources more than they are the curriculum. Don't use them as curriculum. Here's another thing about homework. Research is really interesting on homework. It doesn't really do anything for students. It doesn't reinforce. It should reinforce what was taught. But there are other ways to reinforce in private practice, individual practice activities other than homework. So that's important to think. And then assignments, look at long-term projects. How can you break those down into doable pieces, have set goals for timelines, etc. And then looking at tests. When we think of extended time, it's usually on a test. And so, and most often kids, the research shows that kids take about 15 minutes more on taking a test. So you might think a universal design is to extend the test 15 more minutes for everybody. And that should capture everybody's need for differentiating instruction. Okay. Any questions on this piece? Okay, so let's move on. Differentiated instruction it's a philosophy of a practice. So it's based on universal needs. It uses multiple types of practices, just like we mentioned here, based on these things here. And it can be used anywhere in any classroom, advanced classes, resource classes, special education classes, any class can use a differentiated instructional strategies. So the key elements for us to consider when planning differentiated instruction, and you need to plan this before the day. So this is where it's probably going to be on your lesson plan somewhere. So you need to know what kind of content you're working on and the process, what products you're expecting them to provide and to turn in, and what the learning environment is. And so you can differentiate any of those areas except content. Content is modifying. The content must be the same always, but it can be reduced to the basic elements in a task analysis. So it can be small bite-sized pieces rather than big whole cake pieces. So that's important to understand. Okay. Flexible grouping is one. And I personally like in my groups that I develop 5 to 6 students max. You have you identify a lead person and a timekeeper and a note taker, and you assign certain goals and certain tasks for each one. I like multiple groups of multiple levels rather than it all being one level. I like you have somebody that's advanced, somebody that's struggling, somebody that's middle of the road, kind of really be very strategic in the way you set up your groups. That's the homogeneous grouping, means they're all similar. Now you could do it by culture, you could do it by level, whatever. Again, I'm not so much into the homogeneous groups as I am into the heterogeneous groups, which mean multiple levels. I think it's more powerful. It helps reinforce for the advanced student, and then they can also help the student that's struggling to learn better. And then cooperative learning groups are the ones where they work together to create a project. Problem-based learning is a perfect example of a cooperative learning group. And I think those are the ones that you really need to be thinking through in your classrooms for your students. Learning stations. Now, this is something we do quite often in special ed and in elementary. We don't do it so often in secondary, but I think it really works in all levels. You have tables, and then the groups will rotate between the different stations or tables doing a particular aspect of the content. And then when they finish the whole thing, it's like a jigsaw. They put it all together to have the large concept completed. So that's the use of stations. But you can use stations multiple ways. Find ways that it works. There are tons of different resources available on the web for you to plan your stations and try stuff. You know, this is trial and error is really important to work through. Okay. Before we plan for D&I, any questions or comments? Okay. Planning for D&I. If you look here, it's a planning pyramid. You can start with that. It's kind of focusing on the three-tiered approach. Remember, all universal, targeted, and individual. Oops. There you go. Universal design for learning. I think this is the best to use because if you plan it for all students, then then even the student is struggling the most, then it actually works the best for everybody. Curriculum mapping, and that's seeing what comes next and putting things in a sequence. So that's an excellent anchoring, using methods for you to identify concepts and anchor those and teach the routine until that student has mastered that with automaticity. Like reading fluency is an automaticity issue. I like concept anchoring routines. So those are some of the things. And this PowerPoint is in your file. So you can download this PowerPoint. Also, this will be recorded and you can play this back at any time. But so these are available to you. It's also in your book. They give a greater description of each of these in chapter 12. How about gifted and talented students? They're the kids that are going to be advanced. We want to accelerate and enrich. And here's some ideas that you can use for them. And remember, in a heterogeneous group, you'll have students that are gifted are advanced in each group also, which will help you. RTI, these are quite aligned. Differentiated instruction and RTI, like I've mentioned, they're very much aligned. And that's why this whole chapter is about how you can incorporate this into tier 1, which means universal. And remember, that's what you really want to do, is to get it at the least restrictive area where all students are benefited the most. Now, on reading, you need to familiarize yourself with the text and make it so you understand it, and then know what reading level that the text is written to, and you might need to adjust that for students that have a lower reading level. You might need to pre-teach vocabulary, um, how concept dense it is, what the big pictures are, what the little pictures are, and then what you might use a flip chart or a KWL chart or something like that that you might use in helping students with particular texts that they're reading. Making adaptations, remember adapting is the same in the same wheelhouse as accommodate. It's just more about adapting equipment for students. And so we look at how to adapt, but you can also adapt environments, such as how fast you teach the instruction or how slow you teach the instruction, and etc. So be thinking through these questions and these issues. Like, for example, adaptations often slow down instruction, and teachers cannot cover as much material as they would like. That could be problematic for the student that is gifted and needs to work at an accelerated pace. You might need to think what you could do for them. But pretty much, if you adapt it for the slowest learner, then everybody learns, except, but you're going to need to help with accelerating for the students that get it real quick. Now this is in a comprehension canopy using graphic organizers, highlighting texts, using multiple sources of information, using technology, and then teaching them how to actively listen. These are some things that you could do to help the students comprehend what you're trying to teach of the concepts. Now, assessment, there are 4 different types of assessment that we need to look at and then to differentiate. We always need to do like a pre-test or pre-assessment to find out where the students currently are, what they need to learn. You might want to be thinking in your teaching, if you get you don't have to teach everything if they already have knowledge of some of the things. So you might just touch on the stuff that they know, reinforce that, and move on. That's what a pre-assessment will help you determine. You have pre-assessment to know where they're at. You have ongoing assessment or progress monitoring assessment to monitor how they're learning and how quickly they're learning. And then you need to have multiple ways to show, to have the students show that they learned the information, everything from them explaining it to using to drawing pictures, etc. And then finally, your summative assessment. So the top 3 are formative assessments. The final one is a summative assessment to kind of put the bow to know how much they learned and did they learn all the curriculum that you expected them to. Okay. By focusing on the curriculum and the standards, you're helping the students prepare for the high stakes testing because that's what it teaches. It tests. You also need to help students develop test taking strategies. With multiple choice questions, there's always one or two that you can write off completely, and then you need to look at the what's left, and then remember to what is the question asking specifically, and those are test taking skills. Tests that you make. There are other assessments that you can do that are alternate. Now we only use on the high stakes testing alternate assessments for the very severe kids. And then another very popular thing to use these days is using rubrics, which gives you the expectation beforehand of the student expectation beforehand of what you want them to learn. And then when they've turned in the subject or the assignment, then using the rubric to score it helps them understand what they need to do better next time, or if they mastered the item completely. I like rubrics. I think they're great. Any questions before we move to alternate assessments? Okay. Okay, let's move on. Examples of alternate assessments. You could do oral testing. You could video an oral testing. You can use photographs. You can use checklists. You can have them write out or talk about the accomplishments they made. Look at your goals for each item and see if they made those. Journals are great. Those are great formative pieces. Graphs, I think graphs give you a good, clear picture on if the student is making progress or not. And then also there is the like fluency requirements and different things like that. Copies of pages a student can read fluently, and then you can kind of move from there. So there's a whole plethora of alternative assessments that you can use to help you understand if your students have learned the content. Okay, any questions on chapter 12? I'm going to open the floor up for you guys. I'm going to stop share, and any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask a question if you have any. That was called wait time. So I remember a good wait time is about 5 seconds. So that's a good wait time. All right, since there's no questions, let's move to chapter 13. Okay, it's up here. Okay, I'll share my screen again. And then we'll start. Chapter 13 is all about promoting content learning through teaching and learning connections. So we're going to look at chapter 13 from your text. Again, remember, these can be good examples for your final and for the accommodated lesson plan assignment. These two assignments will be really good to use this information for. All right. So this is really important, that before you teach something, you need to prepare. And there's a lot of things that you can do to help the students be ready to learn the subjects. One of the things that really works well might be to pre-teach specific vocabulary about an activity that you're going to be working on in the next section. So you might want to look at the vocabulary of that assignment and pre-teach the vocabulary that's necessary for comprehension. These are pre-learning activities. And then also you might have a video or something that might prime the pump for that student to be interested in learning. That's why I like to use a lot of videos, so you can actually see what a student with a particular disability looks like, sounds like, what their life is like, so you can kind of walk in their shoes for a minute to see how they're like. So things like pre-learning activities, setting the purpose for the activity. Why is this an important thing? Why are we doing this? These are some of the things that you need to be pre-planning before you go into teaching the lesson. Setting a goal. Creating listener-friendly lectures. What do you need to do about that? Here in your chapter, it talks about 5 components where you are teaching for understanding, how you're structuring things, how you're sequencing things, how you're explaining it, and then finally presenting it. How are you going to present it? There's the science behind creating different PowerPoints and different things like that on how you present. So here's the thing, when creating a PowerPoint, the amount of words matter. So let's get to this here again. Sorry, I keep flipping back and forth. Font size is important. You don't use itty bitty font, you use larger fonts. One piece of information per slide is better. That way people don't get overwhelmed. You want to pace the presentation appropriately. The 10, 20, 30 rule that's in your textbook, follow it, and use the pause procedure. Allow you to take that information and wrestle with it a little bit. So those are some things that you need to do. Demonstrations, using videos. For example, an example would be when we were doing the task analysis and we used that humorous video to talk about developing instructions that you follow directly. That'd be very good. It can be, that can be done in whole class, small groups, or individually. If the student can be part of the demonstration, it gets them involved. That's important. And think alouds. That's helping them wrestle with the content. And that's an important process. Guidelines for effective note-taking. There's various ways that you can do this. I think that there's it's not the Oxford. We'll look at note-taking in just a minute when I pulled up a strategy for you guys that might be good. For some kids, you might need structured where there's just one word that they're looking for. Other kids, you might use a strategy where it's the concept and then what they learned. Note taking is important because if you don't take notes, then you won't reinforce the learning that's going on. You need to teach that. You can teach, there's an excellent strategy of note taking by drawing pictures, and that might be something students might really be interested in. Recording lectures so you know what the student is, or giving the students your lecture notes and they can underline or circle things. So that could be a good way. The Cornell method. That's what method I was trying to think of. Cornell notes. I will share the information on the website into the content page. And it's a excellent way to take notes, Cornell notes. And that might be more for secondary, but you can start teaching that strategy in elementary school. So then when they get to secondary and into college, then they have that strategy to work. We'll look at that later. We'll actually look at that on Thursday. Write only one idea per line. That's with the Cornell. Listen for things that are not aligned, digressions. You need to, hopefully, when you're taking notes, you'll get some questions that you want to know. And so write the questions down off to the side so you make sure that you can ask the teacher questions. And then you might need to take a minute to leave the room once you leave, you'll process that information and you'll can add to the notes later. If you have questions or something you don't understand, mark that some way, question mark, a highlighter. I usually have a blue pen, a green pen, and a black pen when I take notes. And that way I'm identifying things with color for me. That works well for me. Again, more guidelines, prepare students to practice note-taking during and after a lecture. The Cornell note process is 2-column note-taking. Like I said, there's guided note-taking where you have your whole lecture there, but certain words are missing and the students need to do that. Here's the interesting thing. If a student doesn't revisit the notes within 24 hours after a lecture, they'll lose a significant portion of what they had heard. So if they go back to that lecture within 24 hours and then their notes, they will be able to add to it. If not, they'll forget. Remembering information just from listening is about 20%. From taking notes, it's about 80%. So that's the big difference there for students. The student needs to master 4 areas of note taking, being able to select what's important, how they organize it, how they consolidate that into a one concept. That's really important. Sleeping is important because that's where you consolidate the information in your brain and makes it all one concept. And then what fluency, how quickly they can take notes. You might want to evaluate how students' note-taking skills, and then if they're not doing so well, teach them an alternative way to take notes, like drawing pictures, etc. Questions and how you phrase questions to get students to engage is really important. You want to encourage class participation, open-ended questions, um, opportunities for them to consolidate the information is really important. Um, have a wait time that's 3 to 5 seconds. 5 seconds more than that, then it gets awkward. And then discussions are really important. So those are some of the pieces of that. Here's some questioning strategies. You might have some prompt questions for the students that you give out to them in advance. They need to state the question clearly. You need to provide immediate, clear, specific feedback to the questions and the answers. Have the students explain why, if you're asking a question to a student, have them explain why their answer is correct. So, for example, if you say, a student with a learning disability is one that has a deficit in reading comprehension and reading fluency. Why is that correct? It's because that's what the law says, that a student, one area is reading fluency, reading comprehension, and basic reading skills are the 3 areas for a student with a learning disability. So that's an example. Always ask questions in a non-threatening way. You might want to ask questions to students that are not doing the talking as much. And the questions that you're asking and the students are asking must be relevant to the content that you're teaching. So very important. Questioning is all about a student using their fluid memory or their fluid intelligence. Remember that from the psychological processes. It's using the fluid and the crystallized intelligences to bring out new information about previously learned information. So that's really important pieces. Graphic organizers are excellent and should be used as much as possible. Timelines, I love timelines to see when things have occurred, a sequence of events. For assignments, explain the purpose of the assignment, make sure they understand why it's there, find trouble spots, give hard due dates. You might have check-in times, those kind of things, etc. Independent work is important. Help them learn independence, and this is through completing the assignments. Remember, you do guided practice, then independent practice. This is part of independent practice. If a student's not organized and ready to work, they're not going to be engaged. So that's important. So these are some things that you can do also to help them be organized for work. Using time management appropriately, scheduling, coming with benchmarks that need to be completed by certain times, plan a schedule. You could teach this concept, have hard copies of things that they can use, and then move on from there. And monitor this to make sure that all students are using their time management skills appropriately. Here's some mnemonic devices like project strategy for guiding your instruction, for direct instruction. And it's important to remember that direct instruction is good and is a valid, scientifically based instructional strategy. And you need to do that for all students at some point in their their learning, it is important to use direct instruction. Project strategy is that what it means. The P stands for prepare your assignment sheet, and then record and ask, organize, jump into it, engage, check your work, and then turn in your work. So that's project strategy. Here's or another P to that, project strategy. Organize, break the assignment into parts, estimate the number of study sessions, schedule the sessions, and take your materials home with you. Organizing, planning long-term assignments, set deadlines, set reminders, what needs to be completed by certain times, and then how it builds on each other. So that's important. This is how you do a long-term project. You do it using this kind of strategy and not using just say, hey, you got another week to get it done. Use this kind of strategy. Some more strategies for instruction. Key guidelines for planning and strategy. You choose it, what strategies, you present the content and the strategies concurrently, then teach the strategy in stages from awareness to skill. And that's important to remember. And it's the 80-20 rule. Remember, 80% of your instruction needs to be on prerequisite or prior knowledge, and 20% is on new knowledge. So that's important to remember. Go from awareness to skill, or mastery. Mastery is where you want the students to get. Tools, graphic and questioning materials, the graphic organizers. These are some tools that you can teach them. Metacognitive, the big picture. Memory strategies, there's a whole ton of them. The mnemonic devices are great, like Home and Great Lakes, acrostics, lists, keywords, overlearning. Overlearning is a thing of fluency. But these are some things that are really important for helping you learn better strategies and teach better strategies to your students. Teach your student to self-monitor how are their behavior and their learning. This is the difference between a student and a learner. A learner is responsible for their learning. A student is just somebody that sits and gets. So that's important to remember those two differences. You want your students to be learners. The marker strategy is make a list of goals, arrange a plan, run your plan, keep records, evaluate yourself, and then reward yourself. It's very much behavior management, is it not? Self-advocacy, this is very important. Students need to be advocates for themselves. If they take responsibility, then they will learn more and be more appropriate. Here are some self-advocacy strategies. I like iPlan. It works good. I've used it a lot with my students and with disabilities. Okay, I'll stop share here. And any questions about chapter 13? Okay, so Okay, again, I'm going to, this is what we did today is those two chapters. Go back and reread those. That way you can get some information about ideas that you can use in your final case studies and for the lesson plan assignment. Um, so the last 10 minutes of class are for questions. And you guys can open your mics and ask questions. If not, then I will see you guys on Thursday. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end it for everybody because apparently everybody doesn't have any questions. Okay, see you guys Thursday.